Mewtwo, the bioengineered Pokemon, designed to be the strongest in the world. A creature whose terrible power is a result of humans who attempted to play God. But who were these humans? Who created Mewtwo, and for what purpose?
Who am I? What is my true reason for being?
Well, depending on the source, Mewtwo in fact has a number of different origins. From being the natural offspring of Mew, who was then infused with the DNA of other Pokemon to become stronger, to being a genetically altered clone revived from a fossil, to being half Pokemon, half human. The story of Mewtwo's creation is as fascinating as it is varied, and in this video I intend to explore all there is on offer. Starting at the very beginning, the real-life man who designed Mewtwo, Ken Sugimori. Sugimori is an art director at GameFreak, and finalized the design of every one of the original 151 Pokemon. That's not to say he designed each one himself, he actually worked with a team of less than 10 people to create each of the creatures. This team would design the sprites in the game itself, and Sugimori would then make an illustrated final design in his personal watercolor style that would act as an official artwork for the Pokemon going forward. This is why the sprites for Pokemon like Vaporeon change between the release of the original Japanese red and green versions and the updated red and blue versions released overseas. That being said, a number of the original roster are his alone, including Venusaur, Snorlax, Lapras, and of course, Mewtwo. Sugimori has claimed that due to his inherent biases and own experiences, he had trouble designing cute monsters, and found comfort in drawing strong and cool Pokemon, which often became the designs that were favored in Western countries. Despite its namesake, Mewtwo was actually designed before Mew. Mew having been a last-minute addition to the games that was designed by Shigeki Morimoto, but that's a topic for another video. Instead, it's thought that the inspiration for Mewtwo's design stems from the main antagonist of the video game Mother, named Gigas. Direct parallels have been drawn between their feline-like design, as well as their shared experiences of existing in test tubes. When considering that the company who developed the Mother franchise, Ape Inc., went on to become Creatures Inc., who have a stake in the Pokemon company, it's no surprise that Ken Sugimori drew inspiration from one of Ape's most successful franchises. That, and the Mother franchise is notably one of the most influential JRPGs of all time.
We dreamed of creating the world's strongest Pokemon. And we succeeded.
So, that's Mewtwo's real-world origin. But what about in-game? Well, most of our knowledge of Mewtwo's creation comes from its Pokédex entries and the journals that can be found scattered around Cinnabar Mansion. These journals vary slightly, but significantly, depending on the version of the game in which you read them. In Red, Blue, Yellow, Fire Red, and Leaf Green, we learn that scientists from Cinnabar traveled to the jungle of Guyana, where on July 5th, they discovered Mew. On the 6th of February the following year, Mew gave birth to a new Pokemon, whom they christened Mewtwo. If we take this statement verbatim, then it would mean that Mewtwo is the sole Pokemon that we have seen to date to come from a live birth rather than hatch from an egg. It's possible as well that similar to Manaphy and Fione, the difference in appearance between the two Pokemon is natural. However, according to the Pokédex entries, these scientists performed horrific gene splicing experiments on this Pokemon in an attempt to increase its already incredible power, which may have also resulted in Mewtwo's larger stature and altered appearance to Mew. Either way, by September 1st, the experiments done on Mewtwo in the basement of Cinnabar Mansion had increased its power to uncontrollable heights, and given that no one had made an effort to show the Pokemon compassion, it had never learned this trait. Mewtwo escaped the mansion and secluded itself to Cerulean Cave, where it could rest its body and store its immense power, awaiting a worthy challenger. There are a number of mysteries still surrounding the in-game origin of Mewtwo, though over the years more clues have been given to us for us to speculate on the wider story. For instance, Faraway Island. Faraway Island is an event-exclusive location, accessible with the use of the Old Sea map in Pokemon Emerald. Here, the player can encounter Mew, so it is thought to be the aforementioned Guyanese jungle referred to in the journal entries. Here we also find a sign with faded writing on it that reads, "6th day. If any human sets foot here again, let it be a kind-hearted person. With that hope, I depart." In the Japanese versions of the games, the last letter of a signed name can be read, that translates to G. As such, it is speculated that this is a message left by Mr. Fuji, previously Dr. Fuji, who the player first meets when he tries to prevent Team Rocket from disturbing the spirits of Lavender Tower, and was in fact the founder of Cinnabar Labs before he hung up his lab coat. Perhaps his reason for doing so was the realization of the atrocities his work had created in Mewtwo. It is my belief that Dr. Fuji was part of the research team searching for Mew and discovered it on Faraway Island. From there, they captured the creature and brought it back to Cinnabar Labs for research, as Mew is said to contain the genetic code of all living Pokemon. With research into its genome, untold mysteries surrounding Pokemon could begin to unfold. But why then the experiments to create Mewtwo? Why, when Mew gave birth, did they perform inhumane tests on a newborn? Why did they try to make the world's strongest Pokemon? In all honesty, I don't think that was their goal. Certainly not Fuji's goal, at least. In his later years, Mr. Fuji can be found in Lavender Town, looking after orphan Pokemon like the Cubone who loses its mother in the Kanto games. And in the Johto games, when Lavender Tower is replaced by a radio tower, Fuji watches over the House of Memories, where all of the graves were moved to. He is a kind-hearted man who wants the best for all Pokemon, and isn't even afraid to stand up to Team Rocket for those principles. Mr. Fuji clearly has a connection with the deceased and the abandoned. So I suggest to you that given that the date Mew gives birth is the last we hear of it, and that Mew cannot be caught in-game, that Mew in fact died during childbirth. Something the scientists researching the Pokemon hadn't thought possible, as Mew was rumored to be immortal. Unfortunately for the scientists, this meant that their research was at an end. Mew was gone. And although they had Mewtwo, it didn't really have the same properties as its parent. Mewtwo doesn't have the ability to learn every TM like Mew does, for example. However, due to its heritage, the scientists of Cinnabar Labs believe that it may be possible to add that code back into its DNA. Those kinds of experiments, though, are frowned upon ethically speaking, but the ends justify the means, right? They moved their experiments to the basement of Cinnabar Mansion, where, for years, they spliced the DNA of multiple Pokemon with Mewtwo's. All the while, seeing this creature as little more than a test subject. When Mewtwo eventually gained too much power to be controlled, on September 1st, it broke free from the mansion and fled. Only then did Fuji wake up and see what he had been doing to this creature, this living being, for all these years. He turned to his fellow scientist and dear friend Blaine, told him what he had done and asked him to destroy his research in a hope that no one would ever commit such atrocities again. So, Blaine, with the use of his fire Pokemon, burnt down the mansion with all of the research inside. Fuji returned to Faraway Island sometime over the next 3 months and left a message, a warning, a prayer that should any person ever set foot here again, that they be kind-hearted. He then went on to dedicate his life to trying to make up for his horrific mistakes, giving up on science, and instead offering a place where he could give orphaned and abandoned Pokemon the only thing Mewtwo had ever truly needed: love. Now, as I stated previously, there is a slight but significant difference between the journal entries of these games and the ones we see in the Let's Go games, and that is that instead of saying that Mew gave birth, it's stated that the scientists obtained a Pokemon from Mew. This could imply that in the canon of those games, as opposed to being the natural offspring of Mew, Mewtwo is a clone, the same way it is in the anime.
Mewtwo? Am I only a copy? Nothing but Mew's shadow?
In the animated movie, Pokemon, the first movie, Mewtwo is shown to be a clone of Mew, brought to life by scientists using the DNA of Mew attained through a fossilized eyelash, and then, through the power of human ingenuity, its psychic powers were amplified. What's more, we find out that Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket, funded the project of creating super clones in order to have control over the world's strongest Pokemon, who he hoped would serve him in his ambition to rule the world. When Mewtwo finally awoke, they were infuriated by the scientists' lack of care for them as a living creature, and so destroyed the island's research lab. Mewtwo later rebuilt the lab in order to create their own cloning machine. Simple, right? Well, not so much. You see, that's only the story that we got in the theatrical release of the movie. A year after its initial release in Japan, an updated version of the film was broadcast on Japanese TV, with updated CG animation for some sections, as well as a roughly 10-minute prologue. This prologue was based off a radio drama, The Birth of Mewtwo, released over the 5 weeks leading up to the premiere of Mewtwo Strikes Back in Japan and written by Takeshi Shudo. Mewtwo Strikes Back is what they called the film in Japan. They weren't so bold as to just call it Pokemon the First Movie. The story follows Giovanni and Dr. Fuji as they recount the tale of Mewtwo's birth. Throughout the drama, we learn that much in the same way as the movie, scientists recover a fossilized eyelash from a jungle in South America and use the genetic code found within to create Mewtwo. What we also get, though, that was missing from the theatrical release of the film, is Dr. Fuji's motivation behind being involved in the project. His expertise and research into cloning stems from the loss of his daughter, who died in a car crash. His hope is to make a clone of her. Unfortunately, humans seem to have far less life energy than that of Pokemon, so none of his clones have survived past childhood and can only live whilst contained in glass tubes. His hope is that as Pokemon's life energy is stronger than that of humans, and as Mew is said to have eternal life, that his research with Mewtwo could lead to a breakthrough that would allow him to truly resurrect his daughter via cloning. Whilst in their incubation pods, Fuji's daughter, I, or more accurately, I2, telepathically communicates with an infant Mewtwo and does her best to educate him on the world and all the things within it. As has happened with Dr. Fuji's previous attempts with cloning I, her life is cut short and she begins to fade away. Mewtwo is brought to tears, but is told that only humans cry when they're sad, setting up both their identity crisis throughout the movie as to whether they're a human, Pokemon, or neither, as well as the ending scene where the tears of Pokemon shed through sadness bring Ash back to life. The animated prologue that got added onto Mewtwo Strikes Back follows the story closely, though rather than show a girl floating in a tank, instead explain that Fuji has merely managed to keep her consciousness alive and is still in the process of creating a fully realized clone. To the dismay of Western audiences, we would be denied a dubbed version of this prologue for another 2.5 years, where it would finally be released as a short on the DVD for Mewtwo Returns, a TV special that acts as a sequel to the first movie.
It's getting too upset, it mustn't remember this.
There was in fact another prequel story written for the first movie, released only in Japan. This story was written by Toshihiro Ono for CoroCoro Comics magazine as part of the Electric Tale of Pikachu manga series. In this version of Mewtwo's origin, Dr. Fuji actually finds Mew, rather than just a fossil. After a number of armored rocket grunts fail to capture Mew with their Master Balls, Dr. Fuji befriends the Pokemon, and Mew willingly spends time with the scientist, offering up samples of its hair for Fuji's experiments. It becomes displeased with the doctor's response though, as he throws himself immediately into his work. Mew disappears, leaving the doctor to play with his lab equipment. Fuji, infuriated at being abandoned, doubles down on his work of creating a replacement for Mew. When Mewtwo is born, Dr. Fuji takes on a mentor role for the Pokemon, teaching it about the world. Giovanni, or Sakaki in the Japanese manga, has Mewtwo partake in staged fights to test its capabilities. Over the course of these fights, Dr. Fuji becomes more and more disillusioned with the way Mewtwo is being treated. But when he brings these concerns to Giovanni, they are dismissed. Giovanni states that he wants not only Mewtwo, but an entire army of them. Aghast at the very idea, Dr. Fuji tells Mewtwo that they cannot let such a thing happen, so Mewtwo must destroy the island, and the Doctor along with it. Mewtwo, who has come to see Dr. Fuji as a father figure during their time together, is deeply saddened by the request, but when armed Team Rocket members come to drag Dr. Fuji away, Mewtwo does as they are asked. Mewtwo destroys the island, as well as any hopes Team Rocket had of creating their army.
Humans may have created me, but they will never enslave me. This cannot be my destiny!
Stepping into the world of manga means that we have to have a look at the origin of Mewtwo within the Pokemon Adventure series. Here, the story is very different. Instead of Dr. Fuji creating Mewtwo, it was in fact Blaine. Not only that, Mewtwo is not simply a clone of Mew. Instead, due to a lack of sufficient genetic material needed to create the Pokemon, Blaine added DNA from his own arm into Mewtwo. This led to Blaine having a sort of psychic link with the Pokemon, and neither can stray too far from the other. On top of that, during the process, some of Mewtwo's cells were transferred to Blaine's arm, and due to Mewtwo's aggressive cellular structure, Blaine's arm is tearing itself apart, and eventually, it'll kill him. Blaine too was working for Team Rocket during Mewtwo's creation, but as the manga goes on, you come to find that half the gym leaders are working for Team Rocket, so it's not really a standout. This series is really good, by the way. If you get a chance, I highly recommend picking it up. Mewtwo fights with a spoon.
Pokemon? Person? What are those? Which one am I?
Of course, there is another Pokemon manga. The gag comic Pocket Monsters was in fact the first manga adaptation of the series. Though, due to its genre, it takes itself far less seriously than most other adaptations of the franchise. In this telling of Mewtwo's origins, Giovanni and his twin brother coerced the Pokemon researcher Bill into altering Mewtwo's DNA to create an evil Pokemon. Bill does so reluctantly, because Giovanni has his wife hostage, and Mewtwo, who is expressed to be the child of Mew, emerges. What happens then is very silly, but culminates in Red's Clefairy infusing Mewtwo's DNA into itself to become, and I quote, Mewthree. Yeah. And with that, we have covered almost every known origin of Mewtwo. Technically, in the anime, there is a second Mewtwo who was created by scientists, but not Dr. Fuji and his team, so I suppose their research got leaked or some of it survived and was discovered later. Little more is known about this Mewtwo's past. The focus of the special in the movie that Mewtwo appeared in was more so that it could Mega Evolve, without using a stone or trainer, I might add. Because Mewtwo is just that awesome. And no matter whether they are born or created, are considered a Pokemon or a human, or even if they fight with a spoon, Mewtwo will always be the original final boss of Pokemon, who went on to teach me what it means to be alive.
I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are.